Preparing to live stream. Ms Purser. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth day of the evidential hearings in Tranche 1, Phase 1 at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. My name is Jacqueline Purser and I'm the hearings manager. As a reminder to those of you in the virtual hearing room, please turn off both your camera and microphone unless you're invited to speak by the chairman. I will now hand over to our chairman, John Mitting, to formally start proceedings.
Thank you. Good morning. Would you please listen to a recording made earlier this year, which is played at the beginning of each session. Those of you hearing it for the first time, please listen carefully. I am conducting this inquiry under a statute, the Inquiries Act 2005, which gives me the power to make orders regulating the conduct of the inquiry, including its hearings. In the exercise of that power, I've made a number of orders which affect what you may and may not do in the hearing rooms and after you leave them. Breach of any of the orders is a serious matter and may have serious consequences for you. If I'm satisfied that a person may have breached an order, I have the power to certify the matter to the High Court, which will investigate and deal with it as if it has been a contempt of that court. If satisfied that a breach has occurred and merits the imposition of a penalty, the High Court may impose a severe sanction on that person in breach, including a fine, imprisonment for up to 2 years, and sequestration of their assets. Evidence is going to be given live over screens in the hearing rooms. It is strictly prohibited to photograph or record what is shown on the screens, or to record what is said by a witness or anyone else in the hearing rooms. You may bring your mobile telephone into the hearing rooms, but you may not use it for any of those purposes. You may use it in particular, you may transmit your account of what you have heard and seen in a hearing room to any other person, but only once at least 10 minutes have elapsed since the event you are describing took place. This restriction has a purpose. In the course of the inquiry, I have made orders permitting the public disclosure of information, for example, about the identity of a person for a variety of reasons. These orders must be upheld. It is inevitable that whether by accident or design, information which I have ordered should not be publicly disclosed will sometimes be disclosed in a hearing. If and when that happens, I will immediately suspend the hearing and make an order prohibiting further disclosure of the information outside the hearing rooms. The consequences will be that no further disclosure of that information may be made by mobile telephone or other portable electronic device from within the hearing room or by any means outside it. I'm sorry if you find this message alarming. It is not intended to be. Its purpose is simply to ensure that everyone knows the rules which must apply if I am to hear the evidence which I need to enable me to get to the truth about undercover policing. You, as members of the public, are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear and to reach your own conclusions about it. The inquiry team will do their best to ensure that you can. If you have any doubt about the terms of this message or what you may or may not do, you should not hesitate to ask one of them and with my help, if necessary, they will provide you with the answer. Could witness HN336 now be identified and sworn, or may he affirm, please?
Good morning, HN336. Can you see and hear me? I can, thank you. I understand that you would like to swear on the Bible. I will, I would. Witness sworn. Thank you very much.
HN336, we can see that there is another person in the room beside you. I hope keeping the required distance under COVID regulations. Could the camera please be moved so that he may be seen?
Legal representative. Sir, I'm going to leave the room if that's...
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Legal representative, I'm grateful.
You're going to leave the room now?
Legal representative, yes.
Can you confirm, please, there's no one else in the room with you?
I can confirm that, sir, yes.
Thank you. Then would you answer questions, please, from counsel to the inquiry, Mr. Barr?
HN336, thank you.
Mr. Barr? Mr. Barr, thank you, sir. 336, you have provided a witness statement to the inquiry, which is dated 9th of May 2019. Are you familiar with its contents?
Yes, I think so.
And are the contents of your witness statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
You used the cover name Dick Epps when you were serving in the SDS. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Before we turn to the SDS, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your prior police service.
Yes.
First of all, when you were undergoing your basic police training, were you given any training about requirements before entering private dwellings?
I'm sure we were. I mean, I'm going back 51 now. I'm going back further than that, aren't I? But yes, the use of search warrants and the like would have been necessary, obviously, and there were no circumstances that would normally allow a police officer into a private dwelling without permission or a warrant.
And when you were training for Special Branch, did you have any training on attending meetings of political activists?
Not specific training, no.
In your work for Special Branch, and I don't need you to be specific about what work, but in your work with Special Branch, did you attend meetings of political activists before joining the SDS?
Yes, I did.
And did you therefore learn on the job what was to be expected of you by Special Branch when attending such meetings?
That's correct.
And did that include the way in which Special Branch reports of such meetings should be written up?
Yes. Yes. That was a fundamental requirement, yes.
Were you expected to record the personal details of people you could identify as attending such meetings?
Where it was possible to identify people, then those details will be included in the report. Probably only a name, but nonetheless, if it was known, then that will be included.
In what circumstances would you report specifically about an individual?
I think their attendance, just their attendance at the meeting was as far as the inclusion would be required.
Were the circumstances in which you would make a separate report about an individual?
There might well be, but I can't can't recall circumstances where that became necessary.
Were the circumstances in which you would report identifying features of an individual?
It's possible if somebody was I don't know, becoming a focus of attention in a meeting and was becoming known to me as the Special Branch Reporting Officer, then it's possible that it would entirely depend on the, dare I say, the tenor of the meeting and the contribution of the individual.
And was there any guidance or any convention about how you would describe or identify a person who you decided needed to be a subject of a specific report?
There seemed to be accepted phraseology. Part of the induction, dare I say, of a special branch officer would be his ability to create and write reports, and if it became necessary to expand upon that, then there would be, well, that would be included. I can't think of anything specific, I'm afraid. No, I can't be very helpful on that point.
Were you expected to report on future plans and events of the groups whose meetings you were attending?
That's, I would say, be a fundamental requirement of any reporting of a meeting. Because part of our function, part of our raison d'etre, if you like, was to attend matters of public order.
And would you report on the group's activities, its discussions and its interests?
Yes.
Is there anything else that I might have missed that you would be on the lookout for when attending a meeting of political activists?
I think that part of a policeman's basic kit bag is his attention to what's around him and his awareness. So anything you might consider relevant or useful should be included.
Was there anything that you were instructed not to include in your reports?
I can't recall anything particularly, no.
Was there anything that by convention you would not include in reports?
I can't recall anything. You will be well aware, I'm sure, that 51 years ago, as it was or more, when I joined Special Branch, 1964, the social times were different and social pressures were different. Political highlights were different. And the phrase political correctness, if you like, entered into conversations much later. So as I say, it would just be a policeman's awareness and observation that would be the important factors.
In terms of who was the arbiter of what went into a report and what stayed out of a report, were you the arbiter in practice of what did and did not report?
As the one attending a meeting or a function, yes, that would be yes. I can't see that anybody else could determine what should or should not go in if they weren't in attendance in the first place.
And was the view that you should include all details and leave it to others to analyse the content of your reports?
Yes, that would be accurate, yes. I wasn't by no means an analyst, and that was not my function.
Were there any conventions about the style and tone to be adopted in special branch reports?
As I mentioned a little earlier, an induction into special branch, you went through various hoops to determine or learn how the style was to be created. And we all, I think, as new officers within special branch, wore a groove from our typewriters to our supervising desks as we went back and forth with our reports being altered and changed to conform with the style that was expected at the time.
By the time you joined the SDS, you had a few years under your belt. Had you reached the stage where you knew what was expected of you?
Yes, I think so.
And by that stage, were you getting much feedback from your superiors about the contents of your reports?
Well, I think there was always an ongoing curiosity about the content, not necessarily the style of presentation.
Were you given any training or explanation about the definition of extremism when you were in special branch?
I don't think so.
Were you given any explanation, training, or instruction in what subversion meant?
No, I don't recall any specific training. I think I had an understanding of what subversion might be, and had I had a different view to the general consensus, that would have been pointed out to me. And I'm not aware of any contrary thoughts in that respect.
And what was your understanding of subversion?
It's very difficult to be precise now, all these years later, but my feeling was and is that we existed within a very sophisticated political system that's evolved over many years. And there is an order to the way that system might be changed. As a parliamentary democracy, it's through the ballot box. And there were and are those who seek to disturb that balance of matters and subvert that system by other means. And so that would be, in the broadest terms, my understanding of subversion.
And what was your understanding of special branch's role in dealing with subversion?
I don't know that I had a specific view of special branch's role, as my job as a special branch officer was to assist the service generally in the understanding of the policing of the streets of London and the UK and the protection of society. That sounds very grand and bland, maybe, but I still adhere very passionately to the thought that protection of and property and the protection and well-being of our society is key to the success of our society.
Was it your understanding that information gathered by special branch was used not just for public order purposes, but also to counter subversion?
No, I suppose so, yes.
In your witness statement, you've drawn a distinction between what you describe as genuine peaceful protest and one which is, in your words, divisive or venomous. Is that a personal distinction or an official distinction?
That's a personal distinction.
And what did you mean by that?
Again, using a policeman's antennae, dare I say, to interpret circumstances and facts that are going to cause serious problems or problems beyond a normal. I accept that everyone has the right to protest, and I've never doubted that. It's a matter of how these protests are put into practice and what spins from them.
What sort of problems do you have in mind?
Outbreaks of riotous public disorder, and for one.
Did you glean from your work with Special Branch before joining the SDS which groups were of interest to Special Branch?
I don't think I gleaned any more than any other officer would have done, depending upon the type of work that we were pursuing. There are groups that seem to attract interest, and others not so.
Put another way, did the groups you come to infiltrate whilst serving with the SDS accord with your understanding of the sort of groups Special Branch was interested in?
I think prior to joining the SDS, I did not have a narrow view of whether that group or whatever group should be pursued or be of interest. It only developed as I became a field officer in the SDS that I began to fully understand some of the influences that were being brought to bear.
And did Special Branch target groups or individuals or both?
I don't think they did either. I don't think they targeted individuals any more than they targeted groups. I think they just had a broad brush overview, and that was always the endeavour. That's my understanding.
You give some evidence in your witness statement about attending a violent demonstration at Grosvenor Square. At one point in your statement, you describe it as having taken place in the late 60s, but you also referred to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes, that was mid to early 60s.
Which was in the early 60s?
Yeah.
Can you help us with when the violent demonstration that you're referring to in your witness statement?
Yes.
When was it? Which demonstration was it, please?
I wasn't a Special Branch officer at the time. I was a uniform officer, and I remember the day very clearly. It was the day that Mr. Khrushchev was challenged by President Kennedy regarding the Cuban missiles that were being transported across the Atlantic. And there seemed to be a thought abroad that was really frightening to a lot of people that World War III was about to break out. And as a result of that, being a uniformed officer, working in that particular part of London, I was sent up with about 10 or 12 other officers to Grosvenor Square to protect the embassy, the American embassy.
I'm going to move now to joining the SDS. When you joined the SDS, were you told to keep your work and the fact of the unit's existence secret?
I don't remember being told specifically. I think that was implicit in the whole operation, yes.
Was your implicit understanding that the existence of the unit should be kept secret from the rest of Special Branch or not?
It was in very early days. And my memory tells me that people within Special Branch knew of the existence of this group. But it was something that people would know nothing of, nor was it something that you might pursue as an inquiry. It wasn't relevant to you as an individual. You moved on and didn't ask questions.
And was it your understanding that the unit's existence would be kept secret from wider police circles?
Well, again, I think that's implicit, but I wasn't party to those decisions, yes.
You talk in your witness statement about being inducted into the SDS and being shown to the cover flat by Conrad Dixon.
Yes.
Can you help us, please, with what induction involved?
Induction sounds rather a grand word, but it was my part of my introduction to the SDS. And after having spent I don't know how long, not very long, 2 or 3 days maybe, in Scotland Yard within the office of the SDS, I was then taken to this other place by Conrad Dixon.
And how did you get to understand what it was that was required of you as an SDS undercover police officer?
I think just conversation with officers. I was never sat down in a classroom or a training room and given a training manual or a training lectures. It was all part of a verbal introduction and overview.
To what extent did you learn on the job?
Well, to a very large extent, I have to say.
And to what extent were you assisted by your immediate colleagues in understanding what was required of you?
They were very supportive. We all, if you like, being thrown into a maelstrom and seeking to find some sense of what we were trying to do, to try and find some benefit to the police service through what we were trying to do. We would never sit together and discuss specific activity that I or they might have been involved with. That never seemed, nor was it encouraged to be part of our conversation. So it was all in very general supportive terms and tones rather than specific detail.
Were you given any briefings about the groups that you infiltrated?
No. But then I wasn't targeted into any groups either. So the training was on the job in that sense.
Were you given any guidance about whether or not to assume positions of responsibility when operating as an SDS undercover police officer?
I don't. I'm sorry to be unhelpful on that point. I can't remember any specific instruction, but then I was quite determined from the outset that that was never part of my role. I was never there to be a driving point or a pivot or an agent provocateur or anything similar. My role was to gather intelligence that affected public order. And I held that point close then, and I still do in my mind. Remember that being my task.
At least in the early months of your service with the SDS, the unit was led by Chief Inspector Conrad Dixon. Can you tell us a little bit more about the style with which he ran the unit?
I know it was, well, I think it was a creation of Conrad's. He was an intelligent man, a very bright man, very brash, he was a big man, physically and personally. And yeah, so he was a driving for in throughout the time he was with us, yes.
You've described him in your statement at one point as a brash chancer. What did you mean by that?
I don't mean to be unfair in my assessment of the guy, because he was as I say, a very intelligent man who clearly had a strong understanding of what the brief was. But he personally, to me, would always come across as a gambler. I don't mean that in a chancer. He was brash. That's my understanding, my reading of him.
I'd like to move now to the Britain-Vietnam Solidarity Front.
Yes.
Was that the first group that you infiltrated?
Yeah, yes. That was the Maoist group that met in King's Cross Road, I think. Yeah, that was the first group that looking back, it was very difficult to make headway when you're learning on the job, as I've said, and you have no specific brief. You know that something you have to do, and how you do it is a matter of how your personality allows you to do it, so to speak. And that was a group that seemed to be a useful entry. In as much as, although it was a Maoist, very obvious and avowed Maoist group, it was a group that embraced other views on those meetings anyway, and always sufficiently largely attended, 25 to 30 people maybe, to make it something that you could drift into rather than anonymously, rather than just a few people where the finger might be pointed at you as an individual.
Is there anything else you can tell us about how it came to be that was your first target?
Now, you're casting around for a likely vehicle to give you an opportunity to move in and move on. And as I said, because it was slightly broad in its base, and although it was very Maoist orientated and led, it gave you an opportunity to use those antennae that I've mentioned earlier about, policeman's nous, to read situations and read people. Excuse me. Excuse me.
And how did you do it? How did you come to infiltrate that group?
I think infiltration sounds rather too strong a word. I attended the meetings and I was interested from a professional point of view in terms of learning what their viewpoints were, and also trying to glean anything from that might take me elsewhere in time. I did not intend to stay in that particular grouping, but nonetheless, it was a useful introduction for me to, as I say, the political nuances, the political factions, and the particular view of the Maoists.
You describe gradually working your way onto the scene in your witness statement. How long did it take you to become established in that group?
I don't think I was ever established within that group. I wasn't established within that group. I can say that quite firmly.
And so when you use the phrase gradually worked your way onto the scene, what do you mean by that?
I think you just become an accepted part of the furniture on a Sunday evening. You, along with others, would pop up, would Sir William Poppy along.
When you were attending the meetings of the BVSF and reporting on them, what sort of dialogue were you having with SDS managers about what you were doing?
I can't recall too many conversations about that. I think there was an acceptance that you would find your way. You would find your level, and so you weren't being whipped into a corner to do this or that. You weren't being directed to pursue this line, that line. And so conversations would always be very general and would be rather more leaning towards creating a wider understanding of me as an individual, of the task I was seeking, rather than specifics.
And was that task what was that task that was being sought from you?
And I was quite clear then, as I said, and I have forever been clear since, that my task eventually, ultimately, was to determine what was going to be of benefit to the Metropolitan Police Service in terms of public order, or individuals who might be seeking to disrupt whatever the status quo or the political scene.
On the question of individuals, you refer to some in your witness statement. First of all, can we take Tariq Ali? Is he the sort of individual that you've just referred to?
Yes. Around that time, and I can't be specific about that time, there was a huge amount within London anyway, and probably elsewhere around the UK, a huge amount of student unrest. And it all seemed to, in London, to be centred around the London School of Economics. And there were almost daily, maybe even more than one or two daily meetings of this group, that group, to discuss this political point, the outcome of that activity or whatever. And Tariq Ali was very much part of that scene. He seemed, dare I say, to enjoy the spotlight that gave him, and that gave him, and he would, again, my own interpretation, relish the opportunity of sitting in a corner with 50 or 60 students around him, expounding his political beliefs, expounding his political beliefs, and political opportunism is a couple of words that spring to mind.
And how frequently did you come across him?
At that time, seemingly every day. But he's not a man that I ever sat down and talked to. And subsequently, as you know, I was involved with a group that he was very much involved with. And even then, I didn't get involved with him.
Was he someone that you had been asked to keep an eye on?
Not at all.
Would you report about his activities if you came upon him?
If I felt it was relevant to report on him, then yes, I would.
Were you given any briefing about Tariq Ali before you were deployed?
No.
Can we move now to Abemanya Manchanda?
Yes.
Was he another of the prominent individuals that you were referring to earlier?
Yeah, very much so. At that time, the London School of Economics Yes, certainly he was a very able public speaker. Perhaps not in quite the passionate tones that Tariq Ali would be able to generate, but nonetheless, he was seeking to expand and expound the Maoist viewpoint.
And so were you given any briefing or guidance about him by your managers or anyone else?
None at all.
But would you report upon him because he was a prominent Maoist activist?
Yes.
Did you come across Ernie Tate?
I don't know the man. Never met him.
Most of your reporting on the BVSF is in the form of joint reports with the officer we know as HN135. And we can use this officer's real name. It was Michael Ferguson.
Yes.
Did you operate together or independently when you were undercover?
Totally independently.
So how did it come to be that you were both at many of the same meetings and there were many reports which bear both of your names?
I was, dare I say, a new boy seeking my way in. And the meetings that the BVSF were holding offered an opportunity to sit in and learn a trade, learn a skill that I was going to find useful, I thought. Later, there was no collusion. There was no collusion with my colleague, either before the meeting, after the meeting. Just a nodding fact that we were there. He had developed a little core of friends, it seemed, within that group. And it would be quite wrong for me to endeavour to swing into, to involve myself with that.
Did the fact that he was already reporting on the group and attending its meetings influence your choice of the BVSF as your first port of call?
No. The fact he was there already was chance, and it was not influencing me at all.
Who wrote up the reports on the meetings which you both attended?
Well, I can't remember the detail. If it was on a Sunday evening, it would be written up on the Monday morning. And and if I was in and had the opportunity, I would write it, I suppose. And maybe my colleague would write it up separately. I would not endeavour to say, it's okay, I've done that, there's no need to cover it. That would be a matter for his judgment. Or similarly, my judgment.
I'm getting the impression that you would both be involved in the production of the report. Is that fair?
We would not sit down together and compile a report. No, that's not my memory of things like that. That's not my memory of things like that at all.
So could you help clarify then what would have happened?
Well, I'm struggling, obviously, to make sense of why two reports might be in, or why we would be included. I can't answer that question, sir. There was no collusion, as I recall, and I can't set out a reason why I would do it or he would do it. There was, as I say, if he was not there on a Monday morning, I would submit my report and it would be pick it up and dealt with. But similarly, his report would be submitted and dealt with, but...
It's not a question of collusion, 336. It's a question of whether the reports are the product of both of your recollections, or whether both of you separately put in some material which somebody else then collated and typed up?
Wouldn't know what that was. I wouldn't know what was going on into other reports, into his reports. And again, you know, those reports were quite subjective, just using your policeman's antennae again to include what you felt was relevant or might be deemed useful.
Many of the Maoist meetings that bear your name on the reports, along with HN 135s, are marked as being private meetings. Are these meetings that you could have attended without using the undercover tactic?
No. I don't quite know what's meant by a private meeting. It was a public meeting, if you like, in a room above a pub. And so it wasn't within four walls and entry was limited. So I'm not quite sure how private relates to that.
Well, put another way, if you'd attended in your ordinary special branch capacity to report on those meetings, do you think you would have been able to gain entry?
I doubt it.
Why is that?
Oh, because a special branch officer attending a normal meeting would rather stand out. I think the fact that your face was known made it possible to sort of glide in and slide into groupings rather than stand out as a total stranger. There was always a sensitivity about strange faces.
Your reporting includes information about forthcoming marches, demonstrations, and protests. Did that fall squarely within what you thought you should be reporting?
Yes.
And there's at least one instance of you given an estimate of how many BVSF supporters and allied Maoists would attend a march and how you were expecting them to behave. You described that you thought they were going to be vociferous, but that there was no suggestion of militant action. Was intelligence about numbers and demeanour, again, that sort of thing that you thought would be significant for policing purposes?
Yes.
You also reported on the BVSF's intention to embark upon a recruitment drive. Why would that have been of interest to Special Branch?
Because one of the underlying gospels, for want of a better word, that Abemanya Manchanda would be promoting would be revolution. And so the thought of the prospect of further people joining that group and revolution being one of their targets would be of interest.
There are some specific reports on individuals. Why did you put in specific reports about individuals who were supporting the BVSF?
If an opportunity arose to identify a new face, then I would report that.
Did the person have to be an obviously committed member of the group, or did you report any new face?
Where I was able to, any new face.
And did you know whether or not information on individuals that you were reporting would have been used for vetting purposes?
I have absolutely no idea where the information might go beyond the submission of my report.
in places you report about the relative power of different groups. So, for example, there's a report about the Revolutionary Socialist Student Federation's conference and the relative influence of the BVSF and other groups at that conference. Why was the relative influence of these different groups of interest to Special Branch?
I think the makeup of any potential protest would need to be examined, because if you went back to the demonstrations that were taking place prior to my becoming an SDS officer, the Met Police and the Home Office, dare I say, and the security service were woefully underprepared for the impact of those demonstrations. So there was a big catch-up to derive as much intelligence that was going to restore order on the streets. That's not to prevent public protest, but to prevent violent protest. So that was always a consideration when it came to assessing these groups.
And how would your assessment of these groups or your intelligence about these groups help with that?
Because you began to understand more and more the individuals and the influences the individuals would bring to bear on various groups. It was a hotbed at the time of street activity, and some of it was very, very reasonable in its protest, but some of it was really, really violent, directed not just at policemen, although they seemed to be an endless target, but at property as well. And so there was a need to protect, if you like, as I say, in the wider sense, if that makes sense.
A slightly different topic now. What the unit was called. I've been referring to it as SDS. In the papers in your bundle, there are references to it being called the Demo Squad, the Demonstration Squad, the Special Operations Squad. Can you help us as to what you and your colleagues call the unit?
None of these phrases mean anything to me. I don't remember any of those labellings being utilised. I think H was a word or a phrase that was used. The H's was a word.
The H's?
The H's.
And what was that a reference to?
The Hairies.
And do you know what your managers referred to the unit as?
I have no idea, sir.
Back to your recording on the BVSF. Amongst the forthcoming marches that you reported on was one in support of Palestinians and another in support of equal rights for women. Was it the cause, or was it the BVSF, or was it both that were of interest to you and Special Branch?
It was the BVSF. It wasn't the cause in either of those cases.
Could you explain further, please?
As I said earlier, there were elements within Maoist groupings that wished to resort to revolutionary tactics that would involve violence. And so if that group was involved, then then we should be aware.
There is a report in your bundle about the April 1969 BVSF Open Conference. And there is a minute sheet as well. I'd like to show you the minute sheet. Could we have up, please, MPS 0736445, please? That document reads, Chief Superintendent Cunningham to see, please. This important conference has been very thoroughly covered by DSHN135 and DCHN336, who have identified 43 of the 50 persons present. Credit must also go to DS Creamer, who briefed and debriefed these officers and provided the essential ideological interpretation. And then the document is to be copied amongst other people to the security service, the superintendent of B Squad, C Squad, E Squad, and a calculating copy was going to do the rounds. Is this minute sheet referring, as far as you can tell, to your report on that Maoist conference?
I'm totally unaware. I can't possibly tell you. It's very possible, but I would not know. Once a report had been submitted, I would not know its journey or its routing.
Was identifying as many people as possible at the conference one of your objectives?
I would say so, yes.
And did Detective Sergeant Creamer brief and debrief you about in relation to this conference?
It's something that I'm afraid 51 years later, I'm unable to recall.
Does it sound like the sort of thing that you would have done?
Again, I couldn't possibly say. I'm not trying to be evasive, I can assure you, but I don't know. I don't recall seeing Sergeant Creamer. I knew Camden. I knew Sergeant Creamer, but I do not recall seeing him when I was displayed. So I can't deployed. So I can't remember any circumstances where he would have met in those terms.
From your knowledge of Sergeant Creamer, did you have a good understanding of the ideological positions of the various groups the SDS was involved with?
Well, he was an experienced special branch officer. I couldn't comment beyond that.
I'd like now to go to the report itself, to pick up on something you said earlier about the BVSF. So could we take this document down, please, and have up MPS 0736446. This is the first page of the report, and you can see it's a report on the Britain-Vietnam Solidarity Front's Open Conference in April 1969. From the second paragraph, you can see that it was attended by some 50 persons who were almost exclusively Maoist, and a list was those identified as said to be attached. It's Appendix A. Could we go over the page, please? MPS 0736446/2. And could we focus in the bottom half of the page? I'm going to read from that large middle paragraph from about 2/3 of the way down, where it says it's talking about a talk by Mark Wadsworth, a talk by Manchanda. I'm sorry, we are dealing with a shonky transcript here, everybody. I'm talking about a talk by Manchanda. Considerable ruthlessness would be required of the proletariat before it could achieve power. Before coming to power, the proletariat and the other revolutionary people should adhere to the principle of making revolution by violence, smashing the old state machine, and seizing political power by armed force. And then there's a reference to the full paper that Abemanya Manchanda had delivered, which is Appendix B to the report. Can you recall Manchanda saying that?
I can't remember the words in there. No, I can't.
Is it in keeping with the sort of things that you heard him say?
Indeed, yes. What you're reading there is him expounding the true political thought track, which emanates from Chairman Mao, as you can see in the report itself. So he was a devoted follower of the Chairman Mao thought and the Little Red Book.
The report goes on to read, Manchanda did not appear to hold out any immediate prospect of this uncomfortable eventuality taking place in England, but invited members of BVSF to view the world situation, especially events in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Jesus. As part of a massive list inspired by Chairman Mao, a massive movement inspired by Chairman Mao. Is that right, that the BVSF didn't see any prospect for revolution in England?
Well, that's what he's saying there. But the expression is that mighty oaks from little acorns grow. And that would always be the short, I'm sure, in Manchanda's mind and others, that if you can push against the doors long enough and hard enough, you might get a little opening and you might finally push it wide open. So, yeah, the process in this country is such that immediate prospects would not be likely.
Thank you. Could we take that down, please? From what you saw of the BVSF and its members, was it a violent organisation?
No, not compared with other groupings. Not compared with other groupings at that time, no. The contents of that group were not in themselves finally disposed, I don't think.
I think the stenographer's getting tired.
Yeah.
Did you ever see any BVSF members involved in violence?
I don't remember, no.
Did the BVSF urge its members to commit criminal acts?
Those meetings that I've talked of, no. It would be in a quieter huddle, I would expect those sort of discussions to take place.
Do you know of any BVSF member that you saw committing a criminal act?
No.
And was the BVSF involved in fomenting public disorder?
That would be my interpretation, yes.
Could you explain that answer?
Just going back to Manchanda's point about making revolution, particularly in his time, that I was herded away from on stage of those meetings on a Sunday where the audience might interpret it as being more volatile. He had a capacity to make those sort of urgings, for want of a stronger word.
I want to explore with you what the boundaries of those urgings were. Was he promoting the commencement of public disorder by BVSF members? Or was he urging BVSF members to fight back if there was any violence from the police side at a demonstration?
No, the former rather than the latter. I don't think that he was making urgings to fight back. He was promoting rather than fighting back.
There's a bit of a policeman's antenna fail there. Okay. What was your manager's view of the BVSF?
I don't know, sir. I'm not able to comment.
Did you get any feedback from them about your reporting on the BVSF?
I don't remember. I'm afraid when it comes to those details, it's so far back I can't remember any of the meeting details, I'm afraid.
You tell us in your witness statement that your next target group was the Camden VSC. Can you help us with how you came to cease reporting on the BVSF and to commence reporting on Camden VSC?
I got to a point within the BVSF where I felt uneasy. There was never a finger-pointing exercise. There was never a moment where any accusations of any kind were made, but my experience at that time with Manchanda was that he, for some reason, had a view of me that didn't coincide with his, and it didn't coincide with his, and so I just read at the time it was time to, I just read it as the time to move on. I didn't see the point in remaining in an atmosphere or a situation where I might find myself embarrassed or accused of being something, who knows what. But it was time to move on. That was the moment for me. And so having established a little credibility amongst or a little more understanding, dare I say, not credibility, but it was time to find pastures new.
And so how did it come to be the Camden branch of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign?
The whole of North and Northwest London seemed to be the focus of interest. Interested groups, and a regular place of interest was Camden Market. Not that it was anything extraordinary in itself, but there was always, you would always find interesting groups there. You would find leafleting going on. You would always find something every week that you could perhaps latch onto. And that's how I swung into the Camden. So that's how I swung into the Camden VSC. I had never felt, dare I say, politically comfortable with the Maoist thought strain. Anyway, and the VSC crowd that I met there was much more relaxed and open, shall I say, welcoming. That sounds rather naive, doesn't it? I don't mean that, but they were more embracing of others. And I was invited to go to one or two of their meetings. That's how it started. Having met at Camden Market.
Was it difficult to get access to the Camden VSC?
No, not at all.
One of your reports talks about the left group groping. Sorry. One of your reports. Sorry, everyone. One of your talks about the left groping in all directions at that time for suitable subjects to tackle with concerted enthusiasm. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, it sounds rather grandiose, but yes, there were all sorts of moments of political opportunities being exploited by whom so, and...
Was this a time, we're talking about 1969, of big demonstrations, or had that time passed with the events of 1968?
I think there was still the potential for big demonstrations. The 68 experiences had burst a bubble to some extent, because in terms of handling demonstrations from then on, the police were able to get a grip of things, and that in itself quietened things down. But there was still the potential for large demonstrations still to take place.
If things had quietened down, but there was still a concern about the potential for them to flare up again, was there an element in your deployment of being in place just in case?
That was a management decision, so I couldn't comment upon that. I remained in place, and that was not how conversations went.
I'd like to ask you about one of your specific reports on an individual from this period. Could we have up, please, UCPI 0000007706? This is a report dated 18th of November 1969. The subject is said to be the Camden VSC, and the content of the report is about a female individual who was involving herself to some considerable extent, the report states, in the activities of the Camden VSC. Also, the Tufnell Park branch of the Women's Liberation Front. At paragraph 4, it states, her description is as follows: aged about 23 years, height 5'2", long dark brown hair, oval face, attractive features, sometimes wears a fawn woolen dress, brown knee-length boots, and a brown herringbone patterned overcoat. Why did you use the phrase attractive features when reporting on this individual?
I am unable to say. That would just be an interpretation of mine. I've no idea. I've no idea what she had, a wart on the side of her ears or something like that. I would have commented upon that maybe. It was just she was obviously a pretty woman, a young woman. I don't know, sir. I can't comment beyond that. That's a full description of somebody that could be identified maybe from that description.
Put another way, much of what is written there is objective about her height, her hair colour, the shape of her face, but attractive features is a subjective judgment about her. Was that sort of judgment acceptable in Special Branch at the time?
Yes, I think it was.
Thank you. Could we take that document down now, please? There's reference to a demonstration of the VSC in January 1970. I appreciate it's a very long time ago, 336, but can you recall whether you attended the VSC's January 1970 demonstration?
No, sir, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Sir, would that be a convenient time to break?
Certainly it would. We'll have a quarter of an hour's break to enable you and the women from Police Spies Out of Lives who are reading this transcript to have a break, and the shorthand writers to have one as well. We'll resume at past.
Miss Purser, thank you, everyone. We'll now take a 15-minute break until 11:30. You can please move to your breakout rooms.
We're going to put ourselves on mute now. See you in 15 minutes. Oh. Ms. Purser, welcome back, everyone. I have a notification for those of you who are at the hearing centre today. There will be a fire alarm test at 1:15. So just to let you know, if you are at the hotel today, there will be a fire alarm test at 1:15. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman. The chairman. Thank you, Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. 336.
Sir.
Thank you. We were talking about the January 1970 VSC demonstration. Could we pull up, please, UCPI 5803, please? This report is stated to be a report of the meeting of the Vietnam Solidarity Committee held at Conway Hall on 2nd of February 1970. There was a discussion at the meeting about the demonstration the previous Sunday, 25th of January 1970. Could we go down, please, so we can see the bottom of paragraph 6? It says, the general feeling of the meeting seemed to indicate a feeling of moderate success as far as the turnout for the demonstration was concerned. But there was considerable criticism of the fact that there appeared to be little or no cohesion amongst those taking part when the procession reached Downing Street. It was suggested that it was at that time of indecision and uncertainty at Downing Street that the police were able to move in and split the demonstration. And it was decided that at the next similar event, something ought to be arranged to counteract police actions. Does that ring any bells?
Not at all, I'm afraid.
I see. Could we go over the page, please, and look at paragraph 9 of the same report? UCPI 5803/2. Paragraph 9 says, a call is to go out to all VSC supporters and affiliated organisations throughout the country for demonstrations to take place at each meeting where members of the government and shadow cabinet are to speak. This is an attempt to introduce British complicity in Vietnam as an election issue. Redacted, said the first instance of this tactic would be illustrated by the planned Nottingham VSC demonstration to take place on Friday the 6th of February 1970 in Nottingham, where the Prime Minister is to attend a Labour Party banquet. Redacted, expected about 50 to 100 demonstrators to participate, but there was no suggestion that there would be any supporters from London. Does the fact that the demonstrations referred to in this paragraph were to take place in the context of the then forthcoming general election cause any change in the SDS's attitude to reporting?
I'm unable to assist, I'm afraid. I don't recall any detail of this at all.
But were you ever told to report differently or to avoid reporting on the participation of your target groups in relation to electoral activity?
Not at all.
Would there still have been a policing concern about demonstrations of the size indicated in this paragraph?
Yes, I would say so.
Could we take that document down now, please? In your file, there are a couple of reports about the working committee of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign. Can you recall what the committee was?
Not at all, I'm afraid. I'm unable to assist. My memory doesn't allow me to go back to that point or that detail.
Can you recall how you got onto the VSC's working committee?
No, I can't.
Can you recall any management reaction to the fact you were on that committee?
No, I can't even remember being on the committee. I'm sorry. It seems to have slipped past me somehow.
I see. There is then a series of 6 reports dating from March and April 1970 about what is described first as the April 19th and later April 26th ad hoc committee. That appears to be a committee formed to organise a demonstration that was originally going to be on the 19th of April 1970. And the date was then put back to 26th of April 1970. Can you recall being a part of that committee?
No, I can't.
Can you recall anything at all about either the role you played or your manager's reaction to it?
I'm unable to assist in this regard totally.
I'll move on then, please, and ask you about what you learned of Conrad Dixon's participation in the Camden branch of the VSC. You describe in your witness statement that he had become a figure of fun. He was remembered and that he was referred to for wearing a yachtsman's outfit. Can you help us? Did they say anything else about what he had done or how he behaved?
No, I think I referred to him as being a figure of fun, and I think it was just his sheer physical presence. A big man with a big sailor-type beard and a jaunty yachtsman's cap and a smock. He had that sort of mariner's air about him, and slightly out of place in Camden, dare I say. But nonetheless, they didn't dwell upon him, but they laughed about him when they were talking. One or two remembered him being just that, a rather sort of large and brash figure of fun.
You were involved with Camden VSC for a period of approximately a year, is that right?
I can't remember the timing detail.
How closely did you get to know the members of Camden VSC while you were reporting on that group?
I wouldn't say I got very close to them at all. They were, as I've described them right at the outset, as a sort of rather loose-knit, very friendly group of people, and they used to talk of me as oh, it's our trot mate. because I think they had a sort of Communist Party leaning, and I don't know that specifically. That was just my impression. And the views that I would try to expound clearly in their views were seen as Trotskyists. So I was their Mr. Trotmate. I was their Trotmate, as opposed to, but I didn't get close though to any of them, beyond the meetings to Camden and the like.
Did you socialise with them in public houses?
No, we might have a pint after the meeting downstairs, but beyond that, no.
You describe the Camden VSC as very much on the mainstream end of the VSC. What did that mean in practice?
Because they were, as I say, they were friendly and had wide-ranging views. They were easy to. I'm trying to not over dramatize this. The penetration was what was going on, was to provide your individual with credibility, and the membership of the VSC, the Camden VSC, gave me an opportunity. And by that time, I'd been around a little while, and your facts get known at these things like you do when you go to a football match. If you've become a habitual supporter, people recognise you. It's just that.
There is some mention as well of the Camden Town branch of the VSC. How much did you have to do with them?
I can't remember very much detail of that at all now.
I think there is some mention of the Kentish Town branch.
It's Kentish.
Yeah. Can you remember what the branch was like in comparison to the Camden branch?
No, I'm afraid I can't. I think I was probably looking to move on to some other grouping or something and that. And I think I was maybe thinking that they would provide an opportunity, but I didn't develop an alliance there at all.
Were any members of the VSC that you encountered violent?
Not that I can recall, no.
Did any of them participate in criminal activity?
Not that I'm aware of.
And did the VSC members that you knew promote public disorder at demonstrations?
I don't know about promotion. They were certainly ever present at demonstrations. I can't comment upon how individuals within these groupings might react as a demonstration would proceed or develop, but I don't recall seeing any violent behaviour from those that I knew.
Can you recall any of the VSC members that you saw behaving in a disorderly way on a VSC march?
No. I mean, beyond using loud hailers maybe, or shouting and protesting in that sense, no, not at all.
What did your managers think of the VSC at that time?
I couldn't tell you, so I don't know.
Can we move now, please, to the British campaign for peace in Vietnam?
Yes.
Did you report on them?
Yes, I did.
You've described attending meetings in a private house where one of the members lived.
Yes.
Was there any formality required before you entered a private house in the capacity of an undercover police officer?
No formality, no.
Did your managers know what you were doing?
They would have seen from my subsequent reports that I'd been to a meeting in a private house.
And what was their reaction?
There being a reaction.
You describe in your witness statement having a couple of drinks with a member called, and we've redacted the name for privacy.
Yes.
Outside of the meetings?
Yes.
You stated gave you credibility. You go on to say, I cannot remember how long I was involved with them, but would have been for 6 months at least. They were in Kentish Town. Their conversations centered around protest and building up pedigree. They would whip up anti-war fervor. I'd like to ask you about the person you had drinks with.
Yes.
Was that person male or female?
Female.
Can you help us with how often you had drinks with that person?
Once.
So when you refer later on in the following sentences about being involved with them for about 6 months at least, are you referring to the individual or not?
No, I'm not referring to the individual. As I recall, I was at one of these meetings and it was at her suggestion that we met for a drink. It was a totally ordinary conversation that we had when we were having a couple of drinks. There was never anything beyond that ordinary conversation. It could have been male or female, but we were nodding acquaintances from then on. If she had any desire to develop a relationship or a friendship, she didn't convey that, and neither did I. So it didn't arise. But as I say, we were nodding acquaintances. And in terms of me being accepted within the group, the fact that I knew her and that people knew we'd been out for a drink maybe gave me a little credibility in terms of acceptance.
Was the BCPV violent?
No, it was a very Communist Party background, and that wasn't their style.
Does it follow that it wasn't criminal or disorderly either?
It follows.
Can I move now, please, to the Stop the 70s tour? You describe being introduced by a BCPV member to the Stop the 70s tour. What was it that led you to develop that lead?
There was an awful lot of passionate revulsion to the anti-apartheid situation in South Africa. And the fact that the South African cricket team, and I think then subsequently the rugby team, were to visit the UK, gave the protesters an opportunity to really vent their objections, and so on that basis. And there was a feeling, and it wasn't something promoted from management. It was certainly something that I forget was worth pursuing in terms of potential public order difficulty.
You tell us in your witness statement that you attended meetings at Mill Hill, Lewisham and Barnet.
Yes.
Why such a geographically diverse mix of branches?
There was no specific reason. You went the way the wind blew, if you like. Barnet and Mill Hill are in the same sector of London, an extension of that northwest sector. Lewisham, I can't recall how that got into the other bit, how that got into the orbit. can't recall how that got into the orbit. It is strange to be out of the north or northwest London loop in any terms, but as I say, the passion that was being developed over the anti-apartheid protest was wider spread, and I think maybe I just caught wind of a meeting and grabbed an opportunity.
You say that the potential for violence and public disorder at demonstrations was huge in a context which suggests you're talking about the Stop the 70s tour?
Yes.
Was that your opinion?
Yes.
You say in your witness statement that they got up to all sorts of well-publicised antics, and you go on to say, digging up the pitch at Lord's and pouring oil over the wickets.
Yes.
We've not been able to find any press coverage of such an event during the STST's campaign, although there is historic media coverage of such an event a few years later in a context of a protest about a man who was alleged to be a bank robber. Is it possible that your recollection is confused on this point?
I have in recollection of a bank robber being involved in anything to do with the wicket. In my memory, as I say, it goes back an awfully long way and has become blurred maybe in that process. If it didn't happen then there were certainly serious threats of it happening. You surprise me that you can find no, or have found no press comments in that regard. It's been long held in my mind that that was a situation that either existed or had been proposed.
Can you help with what you might actually have seen whilst you were infiltrating the STST? Did you see any public disorder?
Yes, I did. At a rugby match at Twickenham. Very violent scenes.
Can you remember which match that was?
I'm sure it was England against South Africa. I can't remember exactly.
Can you remember when it was?
No, sir, I can't.
Is this the match in which you say there was an instruction to attack the police?
Yes. If memory serves, and that's questionable, the instruction to SDST process, the instruction to SDST process was that on given signals around the ground, the police would be attacked. Attempts would be made to rush the pitch, perhaps push players around, and generally disrupt the game. But the police were to be targeted in anticipation that any riotous behaviour in one corner or another corner, and then subsequent corners, would be sufficient to perhaps cause a delay or postponement of the game. That was always an objective.
How were the police to be targeted?
Well, I didn't have the detail to hand, but there were groupings of STST people, and I don't remember how ticketing became available, but anyway, access to the grounds seemingly had been obtained, and I can't remember how I got but at one given signal, there were probably 30 or 40 STST supporters in the little corner that I was set about trying to push police around to start with, and then one or two people started to throw punches at policemen and the like. I found that difficult.
Who gave the instruction to attack the police?
Well, it was at I don't know what the signal was, I can't remember, but if it was, I don't know what I wouldn't even offer conjecture, but at some given signal, the disruption would begin.
I'm more interested in who gave the signal rather than
I've no idea.
What it was.
I've no idea. No idea.
Can you remember whether anyone was arrested or removed from the ground?
No, I can't. No, no.
Sorry, carry on.
No, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
I don't think this was something you spoke about when you were interviewed for the BBC True Spies programme. Is your witness statement the first time you've given an account of these events?
I suppose so, yes.
Can you recall whether it occurred before or after you had ceased reporting on the Camden VSC?
No, the timing would have passed me by now, I'm afraid.
Could I ask you now about Mike Ferguson and the STST? In particular, do you know whether Mike Ferguson assumed any positions of responsibility within the STST?
No, I don't know. My understanding was that he had a good understanding of what was going on, and that made it useful from the police point of view. But beyond that, I've no idea what his role might have been.
Can I ask you the same question in relation to Mike Ferguson and the anti-apartheid movement?
No, I don't. I have no idea about his anti-apartheid movement involvement at all.
You described in your witness statement Mike Ferguson as being Peter Hain's right-hand man. If you were unaware of him having an official position within the STST, what do you mean by that?
I think it's just a jokey reference that if he wasn't that well placed, that if he was that well placed, then he must have been Peter Hain's right-hand man. But I had no knowledge of that being the case at all.
You've also
it was the case.
You've also said that you didn't see his position as necessary for the job that you were required to do. What did you mean by that?
That's just a very personal reaction. I don't think in retrospect I was a particularly successful undercover officer. Some had more capability than I did. And maybe I think I'm interpreting that in that way, that I would have not had the drive or the nous to be able to do what some officers were able to do, seemingly.
Do you think that becoming influential within a target group was a good idea?
I never saw it as part of my brief.
Now, there are a number of reports on the STST in your pack. In one of them, you identify members of the North West London STST committee. What would that information have been used for, as far as you're aware?
I think at that stage it would have just been useful to have known that the people who were driving the protest, but how that information might be utilised by others, I've no idea.
Were you ever a member of that committee?
No.
You've reported on some forthcoming activities, pickets and demonstrations. Do you know how that information was used?
No. I presume that if there was any deemed benefit to the police service deriving from that information, then that would be forwarded to the appropriate point of interest.
You've reported at one stage on the identity of a lawyer who was going to be approached for legal advice. Why did you do that?
I just thought it was of interest at the time. If somebody was utilising his professional knowledge to provide others with a way of avoiding arrest when perhaps arrest would be appropriate, then that certainly would be of interest.
Was there any prohibition on reporting on lawyers?
I don't remember. No, there was no prohibition.
Was there any restrictions on what you might report about a lawyer or the legal advice that they gave?
It would just be a factual reporting of the circumstances and the content of that presentation. It wouldn't be my place to add further comment.
Do you know what was done with the information about the lawyer that you reported?
I've no idea, no.
One of the things you reported on was the inaugural meeting of the North London branch of the Stst, was reporting on the formation of a new branch of the movement, something that was welcomed by your managers.
Yes, I think so, yes.
Can we look now, please, at MPS 0736259? Thank you. This is a report dated 29th of April 1970. The subject is the Stop the 70s tour. Paragraph 2 reads, at a heart organised by the At a heart organised by the North West London Stop the 70 Tour Committee, held on Saturday, 25th of April 1970 at Redacted, an active member of the Notting Hill Militant Association and a frequent attender of extreme left-wing activities, was overheard to say that an attempt is to be made to abduct the South African ambassador prior to the arrival of the South African cricket team. Paragraph 3 says, in quotes, he went on to say that the observation had been kept on the ambassador's address, redacted, and the time of his daily departure and arrival and the night he is likely to return late are known by a member of his organisation who lives nearby, close quote. If we can look now at paragraph 4, please. Paragraph 4 says, redacted, elaborated to the extent that even though they might not succeed in abducting the ambassador, at least an attempt would be made, following the example of the Guatemalan guerrillas. He added that the sole reason for this action would be to achieve the cancellation of the forthcoming cricket. The ambassador would only be released on a guarantee being given that the Tower Hamlet would not take place or would be abandoned if the abduction took place after the arrival of the cricketers. Paragraph 5 states, quotation, He was also overheard to say that it was known amongst his associates that there was no security guards attached to the ambassador's household and that no uniform or special branch had been assigned to his personal protection, close quotes. Was this information of interest to your managers?
I'm certain it was, yes.
Can you recall whether they said anything, they did anything with it?
I wouldn't know what they might do with any of the information that was submitted.
Do you know whether an attempt was made to abduct the ambassador?
I have no idea. I know that he had a residence in Notting Hill, but beyond that, I have no idea at all whether any activity took place that posed a threat.
Take that document down, please. And could we now have UCPI 14418? This is a report dated 4th of May 1970, subject Stop the 70s Tour. It's a report on an individual. Paragraph 2 says that, redacted, is the secretary of the North West London Committee of the Stop the 70 Tour. Paragraph 3 says, she is currently living with, redacted, at, redacted, and employed as a secretary at, redacted. Paragraph 4, she is a close friend of, redacted, chairman of the Northwest Stst, but cannot be described as being politically aware. She is, in fact, a somewhat immature, naive person, and it would seem that she was made secretary of the group because of her clerical experience. Paragraph 5 relates to forthcoming employment as a probation officer. And could we scroll down to paragraph 6, please? Paragraph 6 reads, her description is as follows. Aged about 23 years, height 5 foot, short fair hair, slim build, well-developed bust, slightly Jewish experience, often wears dark-rimmed spectacles and has a slight cast in her left eye. 336, why did you describe this person as having a well-developed bust?
When I read descriptions like that, I see what I would have viewed then to be a helpful build of a picture for somebody to cast in their mind's eye and understand the person. The person I'm talking about and describing. Nothing more sinister than that. So I was trying to be as descriptive as possible.
Why would you need to develop a picture in their mind's eye?
I have no idea. This is just a policeman's nous, if you like, a policeman's antennae, putting something together that may or may not be useful, and that was, and just that, obviously, in the light of social pressures these days, that seemed to be quite unnecessary. In those terms, in 51 years ago, I think it was deemed to be helpful.
And why did you describe her to be of slightly Jewish appearance?
Because that's how I would have seen her. That's how I would have understood her appearance.
That comment is a subjective judgment, isn't it?
I think that paragraph and things like that would always be subjective.
Well, something like short fair hair or height 5 feet is an objective fact. Slightly Jewish appearance depends on a stereotype, doesn't it, of what a Jewish person looks like?
Can I say that that's a modern day interpretation and now how it would have been, and not how it would have been viewed then?
You've reported quite a lot of detail about this person, her work, her home situation, her private life, her degree of political sophistication. Why did you go into so much detail?
I think I was just, dare I say, fortunate enough to piece that together. The more information one makes available, then the more helpful it may or may not be.
Thank you. Can we take that document down, please? There's another document. We can go to it if necessary, but you report that the North West London Stst was organising a peaceful demonstration for Lords in contrast to the South East London Stst. Their demonstration smothering the Oval with posters. Suggestions for the North West London Stst event included a torchlight midnight procession, which seemed to receive some favour. What was the policing value in reporting an intention to conduct an entirely peaceful demonstration?
I again was not the analyst. My task was to report facts as they were presented to me, and I would still maintain that to fail to do that would be negligent in my view. How it's subsequently utilised was never my role, or something that I needed to assess.
Why, in your mind, would it have been negligent not to have reported that information?
I think because there's a potential for people to get out on the streets of midnight on a albeit peaceful protest. It's still something that the police should be aware of, and to fail to be aware of or fail to attend just to be assured of a peaceful demonstration, again, is part of the policeman
Mouse.
antennae.
Come on, you can do it. Come on,
I hope he's
stenographer.
all right. You're right, Dick.
Sure, Dick's fine.
Oh.
Have we crashed?
No. It'd be terrible if something had happened. Oh, here he is. Oh no, he's not. No.
Oh, bloody hell.
To be assured, part of it, part of peaceful demonstration, again, is part of a policeman's protective role of society.
What was your manager's view of the Stst?
I think they were very concerned about the potential for criminal damage and violence.
How well did you get to know the participants in the Stst with whom you mixed?
Not very well at all. I drifted in and drifted out as I have done other organisations.
Did you socialise with them?
No.
And what brought your deployment with Stst to an end?
I can't remember. I think maybe the experience I had at Twickenham in the rugby would have drawn me away from the organisation.
You tell us that the final group that you infiltrated was the International Marxist group.
Yes.
And that you had an introduction from a member of the Kentish Town VSC. Can you tell us any more about how you came to get into the IMG?
No, I can't. I'm unable to assist there. Just it was all part of these general, rather drifting conversations that you would have with people. And somebody would say, "Oh, come along to that other meeting," or "We meet here on a Sunday night," or whatever. And you may find it interesting, and you've got something interesting about this or that. You've got something interesting to say, come and tell us what you think about this or that. So that move into the IMG would have been along those lines.
You say in your statement that one of the reasons you saw for infiltrating the IMG was that it took part in every demonstration going. Was the IMG a violent organisation?
I don't know if it was a violent organisation. It certainly was. It certainly was much more vociferous in its protests, mainly because of its organiser, and I think therefore the potential to pick up violence on the fringe was always there to be promoted in the organiser's view.
Who were you referring to as the organiser?
Tariq Ali.
Did you see anyone from the IMG committing criminal offences to promote the IMG's cause?
I can't remember, no.
Did you see... Did you see... Did you see any IMG member behaving in a disorderly way at a demonstration?
I can't be specific now, sir. It goes back too far. There were much more busy at demonstrations than other groups.
You do say in your witness statement that some... Sorry, okay. Mr. Barr. You do say in your witness statement that some of the violence at demonstrations you thought was spontaneous and centred on anarchists.
Yes.
Did you make any attempt to infiltrate the anarchists?
None at all.
If they were the ones who were precipitating the violence in your estimation, why not?
Well, as I've said, they were spontaneous. I mean, I can recall a visit of President Reagan, I think, and to London, and there were perhaps a dozen or so cars set alight in the vicinity of Claridge's, I think, where he was staying, and they were really spontaneous moments by harebrained bunches, thinking that it was a great way to extend the protest. And so when there's that spontaneity, it's difficult to anticipate and difficult to pass that information on early.
I'm not sure that quite answers my question, which was, why didn't you infiltrate the anarchists if they were the source of the trouble?
I don't know that if it ever occurred to me that was a route that I might find useful, but some of them were, as I say, harebrained and a little overexcited at these moments, and I didn't feel drawn to that sort of grouping.
Can we move now, please, to the True Spies programme? You've explained that there had been some communication between senior officers. I don't know what that is. And is it Mr. Taylor who made the film?
Yes.
Can you help us with any further detail about the circumstances in which Mr. Taylor was assured of assistance from Special Branch in the making of the programme?
My understanding is that he had approached Special Branch with a view to making this programme and seeking sanction.
And got it?
Yes.
You told Taylor that one of the things you'd done whilst infiltrating the IMG was to take an impression of the IMG office keys. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you stand by that account?
I do. It was rather more a comic story than anything sinister. For some peculiar reason, I remembered I'd been to a number of meetings, and the office was always manned from 5:30, where it was normally manned by somebody through the day, 5:30 to 8:30, in case there were phone calls or drop-ins or whatever. And the person would normally seemingly cover that shift wasn't going to be available. And those at the one meeting said, well, is there anybody else that can help us out? So I apparently reluctantly offered my services, and which meant that I would go there at 5:30, be given the keys and stay in the office until 8:30, then lock up and pop the keys, he said, Sir William Pompey, the keys through a letterbox next door. William Pompey them through the letterbox next door, and having then realised that I would have the keys to these premises, I raised with my senior officer the fact that I would have these keys, and would anyone be interested. And the next thing I knew, the next day, the opportunity to press those keys was given. And beyond that, and I rather flippantly say, well, just in case somebody wants to visit, but that's been rather serious. More seriously interpreted since then. But it was never intended. It was never intended as a serious quip, and it was not something that Special Branch would be interested in. Why would we be interested in? We already had its keys in our possession. It's not something that we would need to do.
But presumably, taking an impression of the keys would be for the purpose of gaining access to the building at another time.
Maybe, yes. I raised the question and the question was answered, and so I did as I was requested.
Were your managers pleased with you for obtaining those keys, or the impression of those keys?
No, I've no idea. It's not something that one sought. It's another facet of the activity.
Do you know if any of your colleagues, and please don't name anybody when answering this, do you know whether any of your colleagues obtained keys to the premises occupied by their target groups?
No, I have no idea.
You've described some of your colleagues being upset at you having participated in that television programme.
Yes, as far as you
could tell, what was it about your participation that upset them?
I'm still at a loss to understand that. I've lost a whole bunch of good friends from that time, and I hasten to point out to them that which I spoke of had occurred something like 37 to 38 years prior to that programme, and if it related to some disclosure about SDS activity, then the SDS had not moved on in any way from the rather bumbling times when I'd been a junior early officer in that, and I've no idea what happened. When you leave the SDS, you're constantly looking forward. You don't look back, and I didn't seek to find out what was going on. Nobody would ever tell you what was going on beyond your involvement with it. But it was disappointing that some seem to take such exception to rather frivolous comments. And I thought they should have known better. And sought a fuller explanation from me, rather than rushing to judgment.
To put it in very simplistic terms, did you think what you were telling the BBC was an account of good things or bad things?
I have a view, and I'm not relating it to these specific circumstances. I think I think we as a society have an expectation that there will be people guarding the edges of our civilization to prevent an overrunning, if you like, and a disturbance of our political status quo. And so yeah, that's my rather innocent, dare I say, innocent view of how things should be. And I think other people have an expectation that our boundaries will be guarded.
Did you think that your colleagues were upset because they were concerned you had compromised the operational security of the SDS, or did they regard you as a whistleblower?
I don't think they viewed me as a whistleblower. I think it was just a rather short-sighted thing to have said on my part, and maybe they were right in that respect.
Can I go back to the IMG, please, and how it was that you came to leave the IMG? You've described a political interrogation which made you uncomfortable.
Yes.
Did you feel in any physical danger?
Not in physical danger, no.
You've described that you decided at that point to bring the deployment to an end, and you describe drifting away gradually after that.
Yes.
Why did you feel the need to make it a gradual exfiltration?
When I say gradual, it wasn't the next morning. I took my box and walked away, but then it wasn't a 6-month departure. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks of drifting in, hi, I'm off, going to do this or that, and then disappearing. So a gradual withdrawal in that sense, but nothing dramatic nor lengthy.
In terms of the length of SDS deployments at this time, you've given the impression in your statement that the duration of SDS deployments was for as long as the undercover officer was considered by management to be useful, subject, I suppose, to being compromised or asking to leave. Is that fair?
I think it would always be a matter of the, unless the individual officer proved to be incapable or not able, then it would always be a matter for the individual. And I had reached the end of my time. I knew that. It was time to pull away.
I'm going to ask now about a few general topics before I finish. First of all, you've described the SDS as being able to fill in gaps in intelligence, being more focused. How did you mean that it was more focused?
As I said earlier, I think the Metropolitan Police and the Home Office and the Security Service collectively had been embarrassed by the failure of the police service to be able to contain 2 very considerable demonstrations in London that had caused massive disruption, damage to police officers, police horses, and the creation of the SDS as a means of reducing the impact of such damage had to be viewed as useful and necessary.
You've said in your statement that you would produce about 2 or 3 reports a week, and that your income increased as a result of the overtime payments that you received. Were there also quiet periods during your deployment?
I don't recall quiet periods. Once you launched into it, there was always something bubbling as worth pursuing. and worth pursuing, it's sealed. So there were higher points maybe, but no quieter and low points.
You've described attending the SDS flat daily.
Yes.
Did you see a good deal of your colleagues during the time with the SDS?
Yes.
And how well did you get to know them?
I think very well, very well. A very committed bunch of individuals and people whom I have great admiration for.
And were you there to help one another if you ran into problems and wanted to talk to people about how to deal with problems you were having in your deployment?
Yes, if that need ever arose, then I had the satisfaction of knowing that there was a shoulder to lean upon.
And did you, sorry, carry on.
But I never felt it necessary to develop a shoulder rather than just a normal friendly conversation with my colleagues.
I don't want you to give me any details, but did you know, in broad terms, basically what your colleagues were doing in terms of who they were infiltrating?
To be honest, no. I was working with, at that time, there were probably about 7 or 8 of us, and if that many, I don't remember. But having a very broad brush overview of what field they might be in, it didn't seem ever appropriate to pursue what they were doing within that field, and neither did they deem it necessary to pursue me in that regard.
You've described reading literature as one of those things that you did at the SDS flat. Is that literature that you had obtained when attending group functions and events, or was it material that was coming from the police side for you to read, or both?
Nothing coming from the police side. It was all manner of books and literature that was being filtered. Newspapers handed out at meetings and bookshops and Camden Market, for instance, things like that. There was a whole raft of material available, and it was.
You describe your bosses actually being round at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Does it follow from that you saw a good deal of them?
Yes. At the time I was involved, it seemed yes. They were not ever present, but certainly often present.
Did you feel they were there for you if you needed them?
Absolutely.
And although you've been very clear to explain that you made a lot of decisions as to how you went about your job, would it be fair to say they were well aware of what you were doing?
Absolutely.
You've referred to a CID diary. Did you include details of your undercover work in that diary?
No, it was a report of my daily activity. And from the time I'd become a detective, I'd submitted a daily diary. And it was never something that was included in the content of that diary. It was you were doing what you were doing, and I wrote my diary up and passed it on to my supervisors, who audited it, and they passed it back to me.
So if you had attended an activist meeting, what would your diary for that day look like?
It's so long ago, apart from the fact that saying that I'd been to a meeting at so-and-so, it wouldn't be more detailed than that.
I appreciate that this may not be an easy question, but do you have any idea what happened to your diaries?
Absolutely none at all.
You refer in your witness statements to the fact that a couple of pubs in Cuban you thought was sometimes people there who were associated with the IRA. Did you ever report on them whilst you were a member of the SDS?
No.
You've explained in your witness statement that you think you were always conscious that you were a police officer and it held you back from your undercover work. You've touched upon that again today. Can you explain what you mean by that?
It's something that was almost ingrained, if you like, and perhaps some people have more ability to glide into another persona than I did. I'm not suggesting for one moment that I was not useful, and that would be not for me to assess anyway, but I think what I did was useful, but I think others were more useful because of their ability, and they're not suggesting that they were forgetting they were police officers too, but 90% of me the whole time was telling me that I was a Metropolitan Police officer doing my very best to aid the police in its contribution to society. That sounds rather grand, but that's in the back of my mind. That's how I viewed things.
You've described carrying your warrant card with you whilst on operations undercover. Was that something you were supposed to have done?
I never received an instruction to the contrary. Again, it was a policeman thing to do. It seemed obvious not to carry it in your wallet, where it could have been picked up by accident or otherwise. But yes, I don't recall ever not having it secreted around me in some place or another.
Can I move now to the industrial section of Special Branch? You described being aware of the existence of the industrial section before you joined the SDS, knowing about the Economic League and that the Chief Superintendent of C Squad had joined the Economic League after leaving Special Branch. Is the industrial section the same as the industrial desk, or are they two different things?
They're the same thing. The industrial section was nothing more than a small group of guys working in one particular office with a particular task. And yeah, that was it.
Did you have, I beg your pardon?
It was a mainstream activity.
Did you have anything to do with the industrial section before you joined the SDS?
No, I don't. I don't remember being particularly busy anyway. No, I don't. I didn't, no.
If I've understood your evidence correctly, later on in your career, though, you did work in the industrial section covering engineering, is that right?
That's correct.
And that you've described that there was great concern about Russian-backed infiltration into industry, is that right?
Absolutely.
Can you help us? Again, please don't name names. Did any former SDS officers, to your knowledge, ever join the Economic League or any other similar organisation?
I've no idea. The reason why I mentioned my former chief superintendent when I joined Special Branch, we went through a series of induction lectures, And I remember being quite alarmed by the man's assessment of the infiltration of the of the British political movement, particularly the trade union movement, by the Russians at that time. And he strongly held the view that within 10 years of that particular time, Great Britain would be under his terms, the yoke of communism. And I was amazed that he should see that. It was something that rather stuck with me. And then he did subsequently go to work, and I don't know for how long or in what capacity, with the Economic League. But beyond that, I've no idea.
And when you were working on the industrial section, was any information flowing from the industrial section to the Economic League or any similar organisation?
No, that wasn't how. No, I mean, I don't even recall what it would be. It would be naive of me to say that I was not aware of the Economic League any more than I was aware of other people that were swimming in that same pool, if you like. There was no, it didn't work like that. People would come to us. There were many people in the British trade union movement at that time who were not tainted by communism but the communists held huge sway in large elements of the British trade union movement, and there were people within the British trade union movement who were concerned about that, and you would be contacted by them often, passing on detail about activity and potential election rigging, as was seemingly commonplace in those days.
In doing your work for the industrial section, did you have access to special branch records?
Yes, I did, as did every other special branch officer.
And so, if the SDS had reported upon the trade union membership or activities of someone who was also active in one of the SDS's target groups,
does this mean somebody's saying something they shouldn't be saying?
I think they're having internet problems.
I think they're having words.
This is quite significant stuff though, isn't it? Economic League, trade union movements, informers. And if so, if the SDS had reported upon the trade union, it's skipped, the industrial section, if you've been looking up the name of someone who had been reported to you by one of the concerned trade unionists that you've just referred to? Top of the page.
There would be no overlap between them. Whatever was held within the SDS would remain there. I can't conceive of any situation where SDS information intelligence would leak into the normal pool of special branch records activity.
Do you know anything about the filing system, or is that something we should ask others about?
I know they had a filing system, but beyond how the workings of it, there must be others who are able to respond to that.
And can I come now to the security service, please? You've described knowing that the reports that you saw were copied to MI5. How did you know that? Because
I don't know about the SDS time. I don't know what happened to my reports from the time that I offered a manuscript report, but in normal special branch activity, my reports would be submitted to a supervising officer who would read it, determine how it should be disseminated, and very often within that dissemination will be a minute to copy it to the security service.
So would it be fair to say that that your knowledge that SDS reporting would have been disseminated to the security service comes from your wider understanding of how Special Branch operated?
It's reasonable to assume that much of the reports that I did submit through my time with the SDS would have gone to the security service, but I have no idea, I would have no knowledge of the process or progress of that report or the direction of it.
You've described speaking to someone from MI5 once in a pub.
Yes.
About the impact of protests in your field?
Yeah.
Do you know whether any of your colleagues did the same? Please don't name them if the answer's yes.
Well, that was totally a chance meeting. It wasn't by design. I had not met the chap previously, nor did I meet him subsequently. It just so happened that I literally bumped into him while he was in conversation with a Special Branch officer. And in the process of that rather brief conversation, I was asked a question about the likely possible impact.
Could I just stop you there? Please don't go into any details.
Okay.
My question was, do you know whether any of your colleagues did the same?
I've no idea. No.
Do you know whether MI5 were pleased with whatever it was that you provided with them?
On that instance, you mean? In that instance?
Yes.
I have absolutely no idea. I can't imagine that the conversation that we had would have been in any way an eyebrow raiser.
It's a different topic now, involvement of SDS officers in criminal prosecutions. Can you recall whether any of your colleagues were involved in prosecuting people as a result of their work for the SDS?
No.
No, you can't remember, or no, it didn't happen?
No, it didn't happen in my recollection.
Again, I don't want you to identify anybody in answer to my next question, which is about informants. Was the SDS as a unit using informants other than undercover police officers whilst you were serving with the unit?
No.
Welfare. You've described your undercover service as a stressful experience and a huge sense of relief when it was over. Do you think you were properly supported from a welfare point of view?
Yes, I do. I perhaps if stressful is a dramatic word. It was, if I was feeling stressed, it was because I felt it needed concentration and it needed commitment. But that didn't mean to say I was incapable of shouldering that commitment. But it was a relief to me when it stopped. It was like butting your head against a brick wall. It was great when it stopped.
Dummy files. Can you help us with what a dummy file is?
No, sorry.
Sds Reunions. Have you attended any Sds Reunions?
I went to one. I can't remember when or where that was.
Were sexual relationships with activists mentioned at that reunion?
No. This is something that is quite abhorrent to me, I'm afraid, so no.
When did you first learn about them?
I learned through the press, amazingly. But then I've retired from the police service some long time ago. And these things, I don't want to dwell upon it, sir. It's something that is so alien to my understanding of what we were there to do that I'm afraid I don't find myself in sympathy with any of these situations at all.
336, you've been very patient. I expect you'll be pleased to hear that that was the last of my questions. But if you will stay there, I understand, sir, that there may be some applications under Rule 10, the chairman. So do I. Ms. Brander, I think you have an application.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's really just for permission to ask a couple of questions in relation to this officer's evidence about having had a couple of drinks with a member of the Kentish Town branch of the VSC. This wasn't something that I fully had an opportunity to submit questions in relation to in advance. I did submit questions in relation to it, but of course, because of the redaction, it's not clear on the face of the witness statement whether it was a man or a woman. Having now learned that it was a woman, and in light of HN 336's account that it was in order to bolster his credibility, I would just ask for permission to be able to ask a couple of questions in relation to that, Chairman. Yes, I think, because you're going to be Ms. Brander in a minute. Yes, I think, in fact, when the unredacted documents were disclosed to relevant non-state parties, the name of the individual would have been in it, but these oversights are easily made.
I see. Thank you, sir. I wasn't privy to the unredacted version, so thank you.
Yes, you may.
Thank you, sir. HN 336. You'll recall in your evidence just now, you were asked by Mr. Barr about an occasion when you had a couple of drinks with a member of the Kentish Town VSC. You'll have heard just now, I've said that in the version of your witness statement that I have, sorry, Ruth, the name's redacted, and I don't want you to say the name, but is it right that you remember the name of the person?
Yes, I do.
And how is it that you remember the name after all this time?
Well, I've no idea. I can remember an awful lot of things. Life has many signposts, and that name, for some reason, is one of them. And it's lasted, but I've no idea why. I have no relationship with that lady beyond a couple of drinks.
And a couple of drinks, you said, outside of the meetings? So was this outside of the meetings on a couple of occasions?
It was only on one occasion. Memory, no. I didn't have any meetings beyond the one.
And you said it gave you credibility. Was that a recognised tactic within the SDS, that having drinks with a member of the opposite sex would give you a way in with credibility?
I was approached by this lady to have a drink. It wasn't something that I was seeking, and how others would react, I've no idea. It wasn't something that I saw as a prerequisite on my part to progress my credibility. But at the same time, it was just a drink, literally.
Was it something that was ever discussed with the unit as a good way of building credibility?
Not at all.
And
not at all. Techniques were not something that we discussed within the unit.
Did you never discuss techniques within the unit?
Certainly not to the point of developing relationships with women, no.
Did you report to your managers that you went for the drink?
No.
Would it be included in your report at all?
No, I doubt it, no. I might have included it in my daily CID diary, but beyond that, no. There was, I hate to say this, there was nothing sinister in that meeting at all, and to have progressed it beyond just a meeting to have a drink would be placing it at a different place altogether.
I see. So it wasn't ever something that you discussed with your colleagues?
No.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's all I wanted to ask.
And I believe you have an application under Rule 10 as well. This is the chairman as well. Greenpeace.
New speaker. I don't know who this is. I'm just be places with Miss Brander. We have some evidence today in relation to events at Twickenham which go a little beyond material that we've had before. And I would ask if I can ask some follow-up questions in relation to those matters.
The chairman. You're right, it does. You may.
I'm very grateful. HN336, can I take it you can hear me?
I can, thank you.
Thank you. You said in your evidence today that it was as a result of your experience at Twickenham that led you to leave your infiltration of the STST. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, if I could have shown, please, shown on the screen document MPS 0736268. We can see here that the date of the document is 22nd of April 1970. And that is a report submitted by you. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can see it has your details at the bottom.
Yeah.
If we move back up again to the top, we can see it reports about the inaugural meeting of the North London Stop the 70 tour being held on Friday, the 17th of April, 1970. So you would sketch that certainly in April 1970, you're still seeking to gather information about the Stop the 70 tour?
Yes, well, if I was at what meeting, yes, correct.
Well, the Twickenham matches, they all took place in December of 1969. So in light of the fact that in April 1970, you're still seeking to infiltrate new groups of Stop the 70 tour, would you accept that the Twickenham matches did not in fact lead you to leave the Stop the 70 tour?
I do see the point you're making. I still would contend that my attendance at that meeting was part of my brief to glean what information I could. I wasn't able to make a hard and fast ruling that I would not ever entertain the idea of going to an STST meeting again. I was just horrified at the amount of violence people were prepared to use against policemen, and it turned a corner for me in terms of my projected or projected involvement with that organisation. The fact that you can show me something that happened 4 or 5 months later doesn't preclude me from extending the brief that I was to report whatever I could, whenever I could, without getting involved in the way that I had been at Twickenham.
And in relation to matters at Twickenham, you said that your first written record made of that in your witness statement, was that made in May of last year? Is that correct?
Yes.
So presumably that explains why we don't have any record from the records of the SDS about events at Twickenham. Is that correct?
I don't know why the events at Twickenham are not more thoroughly recorded.
You accept that the events of Twickenham would have been the sort of thing the SDS would have been interested to know about, yeah?
Well, I thought we did know, because certainly the police would have known. They would have received the same sort of information I was in possession of prior to the game taking place. That outbreaks of violence would be attempted at given signals at various points around the ground. And if I was party to that, it was not something that I would sit upon. I would have passed that on. But whether I picked that up or whether
you yourself didn't make any written records of events at Twickenham?
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders, do you have any questions arising out of what the evidence that's been given today?
Mr. Sanders, no questions. Thank you, sir.
Chairman, thank you. Would you bear with me, please, while I ask a couple of questions of my own? I'm going to have to pass you over. I'm going to have to become the chairman.
I am now the chair.
Oh.
If I put you to an event which did occur and was widely reported, could I ask you just to reflect a moment? On 19th of July 1975, the cricket pitch at Headingley was dug up by the Free George Davis campaign, a man who was serving, I think, 20 years for a serious offence at the time. and some people thought he was wrongly convicted. Does that ring a bell?
I remembered the George Davis incident, sir. I don't remember the cricket pitch at Headingley being involved, but I remember the George Davis bank robbery interest.
None of us have been able to find any instance on which the cricket pitch was dug up at Lord's, as you've said. And if that had happened, one would have expected it to have appeared in the newspapers.
Indeed.
Is it possible you're muddling up the two incidents?
I don't think I'm muddling up. I think in retrospect, when it's been pointed out by you, sir, and by Mr. Barr, that it hadn't appeared in the newspapers, I'm confused, therefore, in my mind that something had occurred at a meeting prior to the tour taking place that would have indicated that they were the intentions of the demonstrators, and clearly I'm mistaken, and I accept that.
These mistakes are very easy to make after the distance in time that you're being asked to remember.
Thank you.
One final topic, if I may.
Sir.
You did infiltrate and take the keys or the impression of the keys of the IMG offices.
Yes.
Can you remember whether you were infiltrating the IMG at the same time as you reporting on the Stop the 70 tour campaign?
I couldn't pass. I don't know. I couldn't pass. I don't know the timing now, so I don't think so. The IMG incident was really quite at the closing of my SDS involvement, so I can't necessarily see an overlap with the STST. The incident involving that meeting was my last commitment, if you like, to a meeting with the SDS, and I told my management soon afterwards that that was the case. So it wouldn't have been an overlap with the STST, no.
The last reports that we have been able to retrieve of your STS involvement are dated May 1970. Can we therefore take it that your infiltration of the IMG was after that date, and also the date on which you left was after that date?
I have to accept that, yes. Yes.
Oh. Thank you very much indeed for helping us with your recollection of events all those years ago. Your evidence is now concluded. I'm grateful to you for coming.
Thank you, sir.
We will resume at 2:05 so everybody has their hour's lunch break. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We will now take a lunch break and we will be back at 2:05. We'll be back at 2:15. And thank you for listening.